For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek. For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who hold the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power in Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this cause God gave them up unto vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another, men with men, working that which is unseemly, and receiving in themselves that recompense of their error which was meet. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind, to do those things which are not convenient, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. Hello, my name is Kendall Jones, by the grace of God, a preacher of Jesus Christ. And what I have just read to you is God's indictment against all humanity as spoken through the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 1, verses 16 through 32. Now we see here that these charges are laid out against the entire human race, We know that there is only one who kept God's law without sin, and that while yet in the weakness of human flesh, and that is Jesus the Christ, the one whom we must receive in order to be saved from the penalty of our sin. Now, to the matter of sin, we see the charges against mankind, and in life we come across different people that come up with these questions. Well, what about the people on these lost islands out there who never even heard of Jesus Christ or the gospel, who never even knew the law of God, who never even had the Bible? What about them? Is God going to send them to hell? They don't even know God. How can your God be loving? How can your God be just to condemn them? My friend, if you are one who is asking that question, or if you know one who's asking a question such as this, or such as these, know that every man, woman, and child on this earth today are first descendants of the first man, our common forefather, Adam, and our later common forefather, Noah. For every nation, every tongue, every kindred were born of the sons of Noah and their wives. For we know that the rest of the human race was wiped out at the time of the flood, and the only ones rescued were Noah, his wife, his sons, and their wives, and the remnant of the animal population. So every nation, every kindred, every tongue, every people that's still in existence to earth today are descended from that Noah and one of or another of his three sons. And as such, their common spiritual truths and maybe I guess we could say unspoken laws that were known from the time of creation to the days of that flood in Genesis 6, by which all men, being descendants of the sons of Noah, are responsible for, as Noah would have known them and passed them on to his sons, for them to pass on to their children. And once again, we are that great offspring, great, how many greats, grands of Noah's sons. Now, before I get into that, let me read something from Acts chapter 17, verses 24 through 31 that brings home this commonality amongst men. It says, God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, dwelleth not in temples made with hands, neither is worship with men's hands, as though he needed anything, seeing he giveth to all life and breath and all things, and have made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on the face all the face of the earth, and have determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation, that they should seek the Lord, if haply they might feel after him, and find him, though he be not far from every one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as certain also of your own poets have said. And this is about to be a quote from a Greek philosopher. Paul is not instituting this doctrine in this next sentence, but he's quoting a Greek philosopher. And that sentence is this. The poet said, "For we are also his offspring." Now Paul picks up again, "For as much then as we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the Godhead is like unto gold or silver or stone, graven by art and man's device. In the times of this ignorance God winked at, but now commandeth all men everywhere to repent, as to turn away from their sin and idolatry, because he hath appointed a day in the which he will judge the world in righteousness by that man whom he hath ordained, whereof he has given assurance unto all men, and that he raised him," that being Jesus Christ, "from the dead." So now we can get into understanding from Genesis chapter 1 through Genesis 6, from the time of the creation of man until the time of the flood. What was the knowledge of God that was revealed to the human race that Noah would have known and would have passed on to his sons, and his sons would have been responsible for handing down to their offspring, and so on and so on and so on and so on, that should have trickled down to us. The first thing, and some of these things are going to be a little repetitive or partially repetitive, but bear with me. The first thing that was made clear is God is greater than both man and all other living things. We see that clearly, and that God created humanity and the rest of the living creatures. And we see that recorded in the Bible, Genesis 1:20 through 27. In Genesis 2:7 also it gets more specific into God's creation of man, and in chapter 2 verses 21 through 24 it gets into how God took the rib of man and formed it into a woman by his own sovereign and divine powers. Now you might go back to that argument, well, what about people that didn't have the Bible? Understand that the Genesis account is something that was handed down, that was something that was known. It's recorded history of man from the beginning. So once again, Noah would have known these things. We happen to know them through the Bible. But in former times, it should have been relatively common knowledge. It would have been like quote-unquote world history. But the implication or the effect of this truth, that God is greater than both man and all other living things, means there is no excuse for the deifying, the treating like a god of man or animal. The second truth we see revealed back in those days is that God is a living being who interacts with man through his word. We see this in Genesis 1 through 28, or pardon me, Genesis chapter 1 verses 28 through 30. Also in chapter 2 verses 16 through 17. Respectively, they are the accounts where God, after having made both man and woman, blessed them, gave them dominion over the animals. He gave them rulership over the earth, like in the sense of managers or stewards, not ownership, but rulership. And in that text that I mentioned, chapter 2 verses 16 through 17, is where God tells man the one thing he forbade him to do, which was to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He also told him by his word the consequence that would happen if he disobeyed. God told the man Adam, in the day that you eat of it, you will surely die. So he forewarned him before he even did it. But the fact, or the truth, that God is a living being who interacts with man through his word right back to the very first man and woman, leaves therefore no excuse for the worshipping of idols, non-living things. There is no excuse for such ideas as naturalism, atheism, or agnosticism, nor is there any excuse for any religion or partaking in any religion that hangs on man's one-way devotion toward a God who does not personally interact with them. Or at least some representative of their people, their tribe, their nation. God has implemented from the beginning that he is a personal God who interacts with humankind through his word. The next truth we saw revealed is that God is Lord over man, woman, animals, and the earth. God is also, by nature of this, the one whom blesses. See, God not only made humanity, but gave the man and woman work to do and also their roles to act in. He showed his lordship over man by assigning him employment and work in the Garden of Eden. You see that in Genesis 2:15. And also through God's commanding him to not eat from the forbidden tree. God showed his lordship over woman through making her from man, for man, and then presenting her to that man in Genesis 2:21 through 24. And God showed his authority over the animals by bringing them to the man after God had formed them also from the dust of the earth, like he did with man. And he brought the animals that he had made to the man so the man could name them. We see that in Genesis 2:19 through 20. And God gave man and woman stewardship over all the earth, charging them to, quote, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and to subdue it, also giving them dominion over all the animals. Now you cannot give someone that which is not yours to give. This leaves no excuse for man to think that we are rulers or owners over the earth, over this planet. Not to think that we're rulers in the sense that we have authority equal to or greater than God. It's utter ridiculousness. It also leaves man with no excuse to think that he is right in ordering his own steps. The same truth leaves man with no excuse for him to equate himself or ourselves with animals or find our identity in animals. There is no excuse for theories such as evolution, which suggests that we evolved from animals. There is no justification for thinking that the earth or any part of it has come from any source other than God. No, God is Lord over man, woman, animals, and the earth. And God is the one whom blesses. This was known back from the days of the first man and woman. The next spiritual truth that was revealed is God is the one who provides food on the earth for man and animals. The record is we see that God spoke to the first man and woman is kept in Genesis 1:29 and 30 as his providing of for the man and the woman certain fruit trees they could eat from, and also certain green plants bearing herbs which they could eat from. So there is no excuse for men and women to be covetous, for God provides to all what they need. We see also another spiritual truth revealed. In this I call it the iron law of God, because it seems to be the law that every other one works on. But God gives His word in order to preserve the life He has given us and keep us from death, which is meaning here death in our souls, particularly being alienated or estranged from Him, although physical death can result from rebelling against God. This was seen as God commanded the man not to eat from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And this, once again, here is where the iron law of God comes into play. It is, do not go against the voice of the Lord. That being the command of God. Obeying His voice preserves your life. Obey the commands of God. Disobeying His voice and following ungodly desires leads to death to that living soul. Just as He told the first man, Adam, Genesis 2:16 through 17, which we see play out in chapter 3. God, the next spiritual truth is that God ordained woman to be that suitable helpmeet. He promised man in Genesis 2:18, where He says, it is not good for the man to be alone. I will make him a helpmeet suitable for him. Now again, we saw that play out in Genesis 2:21 through 24. And God went on to institute the role of husband and wife. God took woman from the rib of man and fashioned it into the first woman, and joined them together, man and woman, man and wife, as one. There is thus no excuse for man to be fornicating, jumping from person to person, whether they be male or female, nor is there excuse for adultery, or particularly no excuse for homosexuality. Nor is there any excuse for this gender bending, transgenderism, or transsexualism, and all that madness. No cross-dressing. There's no excuse for any of that. God made it clear in the beginning that woman was a suitable helpmeet for man, and He joined them two in marriage, making them no longer two, but considered as one flesh in His eyes, man and wife. One man, one woman. Period. Now, do not entertain or even talk with self in response to people who would turn you away from what God has commanded. That is the next clear truth we saw revealed by God back in the days once again of the first man and woman. Do not entertain or even talk with self in response to people who turn you away from what God has commanded. Following their voice instead of the voice of God will lead to degeneration, perversion, and ultimately God's judgment and cursing. Look at all of Genesis chapter 3. How man fell after listening to the woman, who listened to the serpent, who questioned her on what God commanded of them, and got her to distrust what God said. She rebelled, ate of that forbidden tree, gave it to her husband, and he, following her, he ate from it. When God directly gave the command to him not to eat, when he ate, their eyes were open. They became ashamed for the first time at each other's nakedness. They hid, made coverings for themselves of fig leaves. But hearing the voice of the Lord coming, they saw that their own coverings did not suffice to hide from God their shame. Although they might have been sufficed to hide from one another, when they heard God coming, they still yet hid, even wearing their coverings. We see, for those of you who read the story before, you know what happened. The man was cursed, the woman was cursed, and the serpent was cursed. And we inherited death from them, both physical and spiritual. Soul death. So once again, there is no excuse for obeying any voice that is going against, or any spirit or teaching or ideology or philosophy that is against obedience to the voice of the Lord. That is against obedience to the command of the Lord. So do not be deceived by rebels against God, lest the judgment God forewarned would come on you for disobedience indeed come upon you. We also saw in that chapter several other things. And this is important to the knowledge of Jesus Christ in our time. God is the one, and this truth was revealed back in the days of, again, the first man and woman, our common forefather and foremother, ultimate. God is the one who provides that which takes away the shamefulness associated with rebellion, disobedience against him, and unrighteousness against his truth. Now we see in Genesis 3:7-11 once again, when they disobeyed God and ate that forbidden tree of the knowledge of good and evil. When the man ate from it, him and the woman's eyes were open. They saw each other's nakedness. Now they had been naked already, but now they suddenly became ashamed. They hid from one another, made coverings of fig leaves, which seemed to suffice to hide from one another. But then when they heard the voice of the Lord walking in the cool of the day, they hid from one another. Their coverings, they even knew, did not suffice to hide them from God. So whereas the coverings they made did not suffice to hide them from God, although it hid them from one another, we understand what? God provided coats of skins that covers the human's nakedness after the fall. So we see it learned even then, in the first generation of humankind. There is no justification for sinners, no justification for those who rebel against God's word, to believe that they can hide their unrighteousness from God nor to think that they can hide their disobedience from the eyes of God. God showed even then that He is the one who atones for man's disobedience, man's unrighteousness, through His own sacrificial provision. God provides immortality. That's the next truth we see. Now, in the days of the first man and woman, God also provided a tree of life. We learn in 3:22 of Genesis that if they had eaten from that tree, man and woman would have lived forever. So we see it even then, that God is the one who provides immortality. Now when we move toward the second generation of man, and dealing with Adam and Eve's children, the first and second sons of the human species, Cain and Abel, we see God is that source of power that makes natural procreation work. In Genesis 1:28, as I said, God blessed the man and woman to be fruitful and multiply. In chapter 4, verse 1, when Eve has her first son Cain, she says she bore a son with the help of the Lord. She says she bore a son with the help of the Lord. So no human being is justified in saying or thinking that the life of a child is a mistake. All children are given purpose by God. For that reason, we are not justified in abortions nor the mishandling of children through abuse, neglect, or any other way. God is pleased with offerings that reverence and show His preeminence over man. Look at Genesis 4:3-7. When the brothers Cain and Abel offer sacrifices unto God. Abel offers his best, Cain offers some of what he had. God accepts Abel's offering but rejects Cain. What's the difference? Abel seemingly offered him the best, the choice of his flock. Therefore, being understood that God accepts reverence for Him as first, not anything less. God seeks to correct sinners in their evil way. He warns them of sin's danger and also how they might be found to be acceptable in His sight. Yet if they will not listen, they will be expelled from God's presence. And that was the story of the first son Cain, who when his offering was rejected, he became angry, and God went out and told him how he can offer a righteous offering unto God. But God also warned him that sin was crouching, waiting to overtake him or pounce upon him. And sure enough, despite God's warning, Cain gave into that sin, which came in the form of wrath or envy and wrath, and he slew his brother. Now that whole principle laid out in Genesis 4:7 through 4:16 for our history's sake, That principle foreshadows God's convicting to sin, to righteousness, and to judgment, and damnation against the unbeliever and the willfully sinful. We also see in that text that God's judgment is against and upon murderers. For we see in verses 9 through 13, God judged Cain for his murder of his brother Abel. Understand through this that apart from the authority of God, and apart from the commission of God, no one has the right to slay anyone, even to slay those who are guilty in the sight of God. Look at verses 4:13 through 15, where Cain, after being expelled by God for slaying his brother, said he was afraid in being expelled that someone would kill him or harm him. So God put a mark on him and said, if anyone harms Cain, God would avenge Cain 7 times. Understand, this is Cain the guilty, Cain the murderer, Cain the expelled of God, and God said if anyone slayed him or anyone hurt him, God would still yet avenge him despite his guilt 7 times. So all human life has a value to God, no matter what. We also see in that second generation, the days of the second generation of man, in the days of Seth, the third son of Adam and Eve, the replacement son for Abel, that God is a personal God with an identity, even a name to be invoked. For it says, look at Genesis 4:26, the account is this, and to Seth, to him there was born a son. Okay, so this really is the third generation of man, and he called his name Enos, E-N-O-S, in English. Then began men at the time of Enos, the grandchild of Adam and Eve. At his time, then began men to call upon the name of the Lord, all caps, that's Yahweh. And the tetragrammaton, I am that I am. Now we go a little further, and we see that God separates from the world those who walks closely with him. We see that in Genesis 5:22 through 24, the historical account of what happened to Enoch, E-N-O-C-H, the father of Methuselah, the oldest living man of all humanity, of all time. It says Enoch walked closely with God and God took him. And this is particularly important to the Christian theology, because we believe that this is the first foreshadow of the rapture. God will gather the saints in due time and take us out of this world before bringing his judgment on the wicked. But speaking to the matter of judgment on the wicked, we see throughout Genesis chapter 6 through chapter 6 through chapter 7 several principles, in that from that time of the flood itself, it revealed that when God has had enough of this world's corruptness, when the thoughts of man are only on evil continuously, God will separate between that which is of his spirit and that which is only of the flesh. And God will save the upright in his grace, and yet destroy the evil from the world. Now these truths took place from the time of the first man and woman, Adam and Eve, to the time of our next common forefather, Noah and his 3 sons, who between them are the forefathers of the entire presently existing human race. So for these spiritual truths revealed from the age of antiquity of the human species, the whole human race is accountable. Now, wherever you are in the world today, understand that these truths come together in the person of Jesus Christ, a man from Nazareth of Israel who lived a little more than 2,000 years ago and died in his 30s, who was born of God through a virgin woman to fulfill Israeli prophecy, so that he would save his people and also mankind in general that would believe in him from their sins. And he did that through living a sinless life. As he was born of God, he did not bear the curse of the first man, but yet was born into the human family without sin, not having a natural father like the rest of us, but being born of God through a virgin woman. Then being born sinless again, he lived a sinless life under that law of God as given through Moses, which also included the sacrificial system and the requirements of those sacrifices. And his sinless life, according to the law of God, represented or fulfilled, I guess you can call it the prophetic meaning of the outward condition for the sacrifices that God would accept to be unspotted, unblemished, to be free of all defect. It had to be like a perfect offering. Had to be a perfect offering. Those outward conditions revealed in the laws spoke of, spiritually, the sinless, perfect life of Jesus in the eyes of God. And while yet an innocent man, he was convicted to death, even death on the cross through the hands of the Romans, by the leaders of his own people, the chief priests and leaders of Israel, who at the time were given over to greed and deceit, not wanting to lose their sway over the people, and envious of Jesus' growing huge following. They slandered his name, made him appear blasphemer, and had him put to death by the hands of the Romans, nailing him to a cross. But what they didn't know is that they were fulfilling God's plan, that in the shedding of his blood, that sinless blood that Jesus gave up, paid for our sins, his life for our lives. For God had formerly said, all souls belong to him, and the soul that sins, it shall die. Well, Jesus Christ died on our behalf, because our death would not have sufficed to pay the wrath of God. It would be an eternal death, an eternal punishment, separation of our mortal souls from God, because God does not accept offerings that are blemished, that are spotted, or that are defective. And that's what sin represented in our life and in our souls. In God's sight, our sin is a spot, is a blemish, and is a defect, which made us unacceptable offerings. So someone trying to pay for their sin through their own works, or think that they can be cleansed of sin somehow through a purgatory, no, sin is not paid for through time or through the sacrificing of sinners, because it is a corrupted offering and God would never accept it. Therefore, you would be left trying to pay it forever, because you would stay unacceptable in God's sight. Think about it. You run somebody over with a car and kill them, but then try to be on your best behavior and be good. Would that take away what you've already done? No. So no good works of a sinner can wash away their own sin. It has to be covered by a pure offering, an offering separated from their sin, a holy offering, and that's what Jesus Christ was. And God showed that He accepted that offering by raising Jesus Christ back up from the dead, raising Him to life. And He was seen by 500 plus of His followers between the day of His resurrection and about 30 something days later, 40 something days later, shortly before Pentecost. Now, you can believe it or not, but I urge you to believe it. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever believeth in Him shall not perish but have everlasting life. For God did not send His Son into the world to condemn the world, but rather that the world through Him might be saved. Whoever believes on the Son is not condemned, but whoever believes not on the Son stands condemned already. And this is the condemnation, that light is come into the world, but the world loved darkness rather than the light, for its deeds were evil. For anyone who does evil hates the light and will not come to the light, lest their evil deeds be reproved or exposed. Now, Jesus Christ was revealed to be that light, and revealed to be that Son of God. And if you want to be saved from the wrath of God, which is hanging over you because of your sin, and Jesus Christ is your only refuge, your only hope, your only escape. For He is God's one and only way of salvation for the sinner. Take heed and obey the command of the Lord. You are accountable for it.